Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of the newest, most rigorous research and, well, we plunge right in looking for the insights that truly matter.
And today we are diving deep into a subject that has not only, redefined technology, but is actively challenging the very foundations of cognitive science, large language
I mean,
models.
they're phenomenal. We all interact with them daily now. A machine can write a flawless sonnet in the style of a poet who's been gone for centuries, or generate complex, clean code in seconds.
And it can explain the most complex topics in cosmology or cellular biology instantly, tailored to, whatever audience you want. The sheer, almost uncanny fluency of these models is now, well, it's an undeniable fact of modern life.
It really is. And for researchers like us, this isn't just some technical curiosity or, a convenient productivity tool.
No, not at all. The arrival of LLMs and their seemingly sudden ability to mimic human language output so convincingly has become a potential disruption, a huge one.
It's aimed at one of the longest, most fundamental, and frankly, most fiercely contested debates in the cognitive sciences.
How exactly do human beings learn language?
So our mission today is pretty ambitious. We've got sources on one side arguing that the LLM's success proves these foundational theories wrong, while others are arguing that no, LLMs are merely sophisticated statistical mimics.
Right. So we really need to unpack this central question. Are these models revealing a fundamental truth about the mechanics of the human mind? Are they maybe showing us that language is not the biological inheritance we always thought it was?
Or are they, despite all their sophistication, still just digital parrots?
We're going to examine the claim that these models offer what's being called an existence proof that refutes core linguistic theories.
And we have to look really closely at the functional similarity of their output versus the potential for these profound mechanical differences between artificial and human cognition.
Yeah, and then we have to decide, are LLMs a theory unto themselves, or are they simply the sharpest tool cognitive science has been handed in decades?
Okay, so to really understand the magnitude of this challenge that LLMs pose, we have to go back. We have to go back about 50 years and look at the theory that has, absolutely dominated linguistics.
The nativist view.
Exactly. For 5 decades, language acquisition has been controlled by this nativist view. And when we talk nativism, we are, of course, anchored in the work championed by Noam Chomsky.
That's right. And this wasn't just a theory. For a long time, it was the bedrock, the reigning paradigm. And the core idea is pretty radical, almost philosophical,
You should.
that the ability to acquire and use language is an intrinsic, specialized human capacity. It's a biological endowment.
And the centerpiece of this entire framework is an argument that seems deceptively simple, but is incredibly potent. The poverty of stimulus argument.
Or POS, for short.
Right, POS.
And we should spend a moment on this because its premise is exactly what the LMs are now directly attacking.
Okay.
The nativists argue that the input a child receives, so the actual stream of speech they hear every day, is impoverished.
Impoverished, meaning what exactly? Like not good enough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. Parents speak in incomplete sentences. They make false starts. They correct their kids for meaning, not for grammar. The data a child gets is noisy, it's scrappy, and it's full of errors.
That sounds right. As adults, we often communicate with shorthand or run-on sentences, but a child still develops this perfect grasp of deeply complex rules.
Like how to form questions.
Or how to understand the dependency between words that are really far apart in a sentence, things we don't even consciously think about.
Precisely. And the complexity of these rules, these abstract concepts like recursion or phrase structure, they just can't, according to Chomsky, be deduced solely from this flawed, finite, and haphazard input.
So there's a gap.
A huge gap. This gap between the messy, limited input and the complex universal grammar a child ultimately masters. Well, that's the poverty.
So if the data is insufficient, yet every typically developing human acquires this complex grammar, where? Where does that knowledge come from?
The nativist conclusion, based on that premise, is really inescapable. The knowledge must be internal.
It has to be there from the start.
Exactly. Humans must be born with specialized, domain-specific linguistic knowledge, a kind of built-in grammar, which they termed universal grammar.
So language acquisition in this view is driven by the maturation of a biological capacity, not just learning from what you hear.
It's a biological imperative, not just a learned skill like riding a bike. And this premise, it held sway for half a century.
And now we have large language models. And these models come armed with what some researchers, like Contreras-Callens and their colleagues, are calling a direct existence proof. against the poverty of stimulus.
And that is a monumental claim.
Huge.
It is. If the nativists claim it is literally computationally impossible to acquire complex grammar from linguistic experience alone,
And then an artificial system comes along that appears to do exactly that.
then the whole nativist premise is just, completely undermined. It shows that the input wasn't impoverished after all. The previous theories they underestimated the power of statistical learning.
Okay, let's be very, very clear about the mechanics here, because LLMs are not programmed with universal grammar. So what are they doing?
What's truly fascinating and what makes this refutation so potent is the shocking simplicity of the LLM's foundational objective.
It's simple.
At its core, yes. These models, specifically the transformer-based ones, are trained only on the statistical patterns they find in the data. They have no innate rules for subject-verb agreement or phrase structure. Their sole, simple, foundational instruction is to perform next-word prediction.
Just next token prediction? It's just calculating probability.
Yeah.
Given this sequence of words, what is the most statistically probable next word?
That's it. They are massive neural networks trained on vast amounts of natural language data. We're talking about colossal training sets, potentially trillions of words scraped from the entire internet, books, articles, forums, code, everything.
And they just absorb the statistical regularities, the patterns of how we use language.
Right. The multi-word expressions, the sheer patterns of linguistic usage present in all that data.
And despite this extremely simple instruction, just predict the next token. What's the outcome?
The output is a fluency that it borders on the uncanny. The researchers arguing for the POS refutation, they note that the output of these models is, and I'm quoting here, almost without exception, grammatical.
So they successfully produce sentences that demonstrate complex dependencies, recursion. They just sound entirely natural.
They do.
So if the machine was only exposed to statistical patterns in data, albeit a massive amount of data, and it successfully generates complex grammatical language, then that ability must have been encoded in the data all along.
That's the logic.
It means the language children here is sufficient, computationally speaking.
That is the core assertion that challenges Chomsky's entire legacy. Contreras, Callens, and their team, they explicitly state that LLMs have already demonstrated that human-like grammatical language can be acquired without the need for a built-in grammar.
They're calling it the usage-based answer to the POS argument.
Yeah, and Stephen Piantadosi made a similar argument. He said the models refute Chomsky's approach by showing grammar is discoverable from the data alone.
So they essentially prove that the supposedly unlearnable rules were, in fact, learnable. You just need a massive statistical calculator.
Exactly, via statistical computation.
This is a tremendous field-shattering claim. I mean, that decades of cognitive science were founded on a misunderstanding of how computationally rich our linguistic input truly is. But here's my immediate point of skepticism.
Okay.
Does generating a grammatically correct sentence actually prove the LLM is doing what a human brain is doing? Just because the output is the same, does that really mean the mechanism is shared?
And that is the essential critical question. Because if the internal workings are fundamentally different, then the model's success is a triumph for engineering, sure, but it tells us next to nothing about human language acquisition, development, or evolution.
It's just a functional similarity that's masking a mechanical chasm.
A huge one.
All right, let's turn to that crucial counterargument, which was articulated really powerfully by Cuskley, Woods, and Flaherty. Their premise is that we should be extremely wary of assuming that because the output looks the same, we're gaining some kind of cognitive insight.
This is where we get that fantastic analogy, which I think immediately frames the debate for anyone listening. They argue that, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, studying the output of text generation LLMs to learn about human language is a bit like studying a Cessna to learn about flight in birds.
Well, that's good. That captures the functional overlap perfectly. Both the Cessna and the bird achieve flight, right? But the underlying systems.
Jet engines, fixed wings, mechanical development.
Versus feathers, dynamic wings, and millions of years of natural selection. They are worlds apart. If we only looked at the fact that they both fly, we'd miss all the most important biological insights about the bird.
Absolutely. And to prevent this kind of surface-level analysis, Cuskley and her colleagues rigorously demand that we apply Nicholas Tinbergen's classic 4 questions framework.
Which comes from ethology, right?
Yeah.
The study of animal behavior.
Exactly. And this framework forces scientists to look beyond the immediate utility when you're analyzing a complex trait.
So what are these 4 critical questions we have to ask of both human language and LLMs?
Okay, so first is function, what is the trait for? Second is evolution. How did it evolve over deep time? Third, development. How does it develop over an individual's lifetime? And fourth, mechanism. How does it work right now?
And when we apply this rigorous scientific framework, where does the comparison between the LLM and the human mind start to break down?
Well, according to this critique, the overlap is really only substantial on question one, function. Both systems are used for the function of generating text strings and computation, which can then be deployed for communication. They share the what.
But that's pretty much it.
Pretty much.
So let's start with question 2, evolution. This is where the similarities
Da- da-
just
da.
immediately vanish, right?
Profoundly so. I mean, human language emerged in the context of our species' unique evolutionary trajectory. It's tied to social complexity, physiological changes in our vocal tract, cognitive adaptations over millions of years.
The timescale is just completely different.
Millions of years of natural selection refining the biological hardware. The LLM, by contrast, has no shared evolutionary history. Its entire existence is the result of maybe 50 years of cultural phylogeny, a rapid, directed process of computer science engineering, not biological pressure. The difference is just too great to ignore.
Okay, and question 3, development. This is really the heart of the nativist debate, how a trait unfolds in an individual. The human child's developmental environment is...
Well, it's incredibly complex. And this is maybe the most critical chasm between the two. A human child acquires language in a live, interactive social setting. They learn from what's called rich multimodal data.
Which means it's far more than just words.
So much more. It's prosody, the rhythm and tone of speech, its intonation, facial cues, and crucially, gesture. And this development is nonlinear. It's contingent on other developing cognitive functions, and it's influenced by all these extra linguistic factors,
Like what?
like the child's attentional state, their fatigue, their ability to engage in joint attention with a caregiver. All of it matters.
And the LLM's development is a whole different ballgame.
Radically different. The LLM is trained on immersive exposure to vastly greater quantities of unimodal text data. And we really need to stress that difference. It's only text. It's completely isolated from all the nonverbal cues.
And the sheer scale of it. Trillions of words.
Yeah.
It's something no human could ever experience in a lifetime, let alone in childhood.
Right. And the model's trajectory is linear, and it's narrowly focused on statistical textual correlation. It's really just a small, sanitized slice of the overall human linguistic experience. Adult-to-adult written correspondence.
I feel like we need to pause here and really emphasize that if you tried to give that volume of data to a human child, they'd just be completely overwhelmed. The model requires an entirely unnatural environment to achieve its formal competence.
It absolutely does. The input the LLM relies on, vast, static, and text only, is fundamentally unrepresentative of the sensory and social richness that defines human language development. And that alone should make us really suspicious of any claims that it models human acquisition.
Okay, that leaves question 4, mechanism. Cuskly's critique says the LM is a static system based on next token prediction, whereas the human is a dynamic system, constantly adapting.
Yeah, so if we accept the Cessna analogy, the mechanism is completely different. It's a jet engine versus biological tissue.
That's the argument. The LLM's mechanism is fixed once it's trained. The human mechanism, on the other hand, is constantly being tuned by things like short-term memory constraints, fatigue, or social goals.
All these factors, which are so central to how humans actually produce and process language in the real world, are just completely absent from the LLM's algorithm.
So the overall conclusion from Cuskly and her team is that the LLM existence proof is weak. It's weak because it ignores 3 out of the 4 fundamental aspects you need for a complete scientific understanding of a complex human trait.
We're looking at a technological feat, not a biological model.
They warn against the streetlight effect.
Yeah, that we're looking for answers about human language where the data is easiest to find in these vast digitized text corpora rather than where the full truth actually resides.
I agree with the warning against the streetlight effect, I do. But I want to challenge the mechanism point again. We accepted that the Cessna and the bird both share the laws of aerodynamics. So what if next word prediction is a fundamental principle? What if it's the shared aerodynamic law that both biological and artificial systems use, even if their engines are different? Maybe the mechanism isn't completely separate after all.
That is the perfect transition, because the critique that the mechanism is totally separate is now being strongly challenged by neuroscience, and it suggests a really fascinating convergence point.
All right, let's push back on this mechanism gap by looking directly at the brain. because we have some pretty compelling data suggesting that the core process LLMs use, predictive processing, is not just some clever algorithm, but it's a potentially accurate approximation of what our own brains do during language processing.
This takes us to a massive study from 2021 by Schrimpf and colleagues. And what makes this study so powerful is its scale and its rigor. They didn't just test one or two AI models, they tested over 40 different language models against a wide array of human neural and behavioral data sets.
40 models. That's like a computational zoo, all competing to see which one was the best match for human brain activity. What kind of methods were they using to gather this human data?
Oh, they leveraged highly sophisticated techniques. They used fMRI, which measures changes in blood flow associated with brain activity, so it gives you good spatial resolution. But crucially, they also used ECOG.
ECOG. Let's quickly define that because that's significant.
ECOG is electrocorticography. It's where electrodes are placed directly on the surface of the human brain, usually during medical procedures like seizure monitoring.
And the benefit of that is?
It provides phenomenal temporal resolution. You're measuring activity on the millisecond scale with excellent spatial precision. This kind of data moves way beyond simple correlation, and it lets us see the rapid processing decisions the brain is making in real time.
So they had these 40 AI models and all this rich neural and behavioral data. What was the central finding that revealed this? Convergence of mechanism.
The key result was incredibly specific, and it pointed directly toward the LLM's core objective. They found that a model's ability to fit or predict the activity patterns observed in the human brain data, both the slower fMRI signals and the lightning-fast ECOG readings, was strongly correlated only with its performance on the next word prediction task.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand the implication here. It wasn't correlated with how well the models did on complex human-designed tasks, like question answering or named entity recognition.
No. The strong correlation was found only with the predictive task. This suggests that the brain isn't optimized primarily for completing specific, isolated tasks. Instead, its overarching optimization function during comprehension seems to be prediction error minimization.
So if a model was an excellent predictor of the next word in a sequence,
It also behaved the most like a human brain processing language in real time.
that's profound. It means that the foundational computational principle of the LLM next word prediction might be the, I don't know, the dark matter of human comprehension.
That's the conclusion the authors reached. They state that their work provides computationally explicit evidence that predictive processing fundamentally shapes the language comprehension mechanisms in the brain. The implication is that our brain operates continuously, generating and updating expectations about incoming linguistic information.
And the evidence keeps accumulating, right?
Yeah.
There was more confirmation from Goldstein and colleagues in 2022, which used that highly precise ECOG data to directly compare human neural responses to a language model like GPT-2.
Yes, and that study provided even more granular insight. It isolated 3 shared computational principles. First, they confirmed that both the human system and the LLM engage in continuous next word prediction before word onset.
Meaning we're constantly anticipating what's about to be said milliseconds before we hear or see the word.
Exactly. Our mind is a proactive prediction engine, not just a passive receiver of data. Secondly, and maybe more importantly, when the actual word input violates the system's prediction, when you hear something unexpected, both systems calculate a post-onset surprise. You can actually quantify it as a distinct prediction error signal.
And that error signal is the system learning, isn't it? It's the brain saying, my model of the world was wrong. I need to update my internal weights. That sounds strikingly similar to how a neural network adjusts its parameters during training.
It is structurally very similar. And third, they found that both systems use what are called contextual embeddings to represent word meaning.
Okay, in layman's terms, an embedding is what?
It's a vector, basically a long list of numbers, that mathematically captures where a word sits in relation to all other words. The model isn't just treating cat and dog as isolated symbols. It knows they are semantically close to each other and very far away from quantum physics.
Wait a minute. If the LLM is capturing this relational meaning, these embeddings, doesn't that push back against the idea that the LLM has no concept of meaning at all?
It does make the picture more complex, yeah. It suggests that LLMs develop a profound grasp of statistical semantics, how words relate to each other in text, and that this structure seems to mimic the internal relational organization of semantic knowledge in the human brain.
So if we synthesize all of this, the idea that the LLM mechanism is just some irrelevant Cessna engine seems,
Oh,
well, it seems far too simplistic.
I'd agree.
The mechanism of next word prediction appears to be a fundamental, shared aerodynamic principle that both biology and AI have converged on to efficiently process language. The models aren't just successful, they're surprisingly brain-like in their fundamental operations.
The predictive mechanism, yes, it seems to be shared, and that's a powerful insight we've derived from the LLM success. But this leads us directly to your earlier point. What exactly are they predicting? If they are masters of structure and relation, where does the human concept of meaning truly fit in?
And this is where we run straight into the grounding problem. LLMs are predicting the statistical probability of the next word form. They are masters of syntax and grammar. But what about genuine, felt, semantic meaning?
This is the hard limit of the predictive processing argument. The models operate in what philosophers would call the syntactic realm. They know how words fit together, but they may not know what the words are. They're dealing purely with form, not function in the real world.
Let's use that wonderful analogy that Cuskley and her colleagues deployed to illustrate this grounding problem, the Spanish dictionary thought experiment.
Right. So imagine someone who is completely monolingual in English, but they have somehow memorized the complete multi-volume Spanish dictionary. They know how to read the Spanish sounds, and they know all the grammatical rules. They can define every single Spanish word, but only by using other Spanish words, based on the dictionary's own circular definitions.
So they could generate grammatically perfect Spanish text, maybe even write eloquently about a sunset, just by looking at the statistical context of the words in that dictionary.
Exactly. And a fluent Spanish speaker would hear or read that text and perceive profound meaning. But the non-speaker who's generating it, the one who is strictly operating inside the dictionary, they would have no idea what the concept of sunset truly meant.
Because they've never associated the word with the visual experience of light and color? They're just manipulating symbols based on their statistical relationships within the dictionary?
They are stuck in the dictionary. And this is the core critique articulated by Bender and Collar, that the LLMs are stochastic parrots, skilled at reproducing linguistic patterns, but lacking any true understanding.
The problem is symbol grounding.
That's the term. LLMs only have access to written linguistic forms. They lack the necessary connection to the signifiers, the embodied real-world experiences, sensations, and communicative intentions those words point to.
You can't learn the difference between a sad face and a happy face just by reading about the words sad and happy. Now, the crucial observation here is the surprising point of consensus this leads to. Even the researchers who champion the LLM as the existence proof against Pocas Carreras Callens and their team, they explicitly agree with the critics on this point.
And that's a defining moment in this debate, I think. They include a crucial caveat in their pro-LLM paper. They state clearly that they are not claiming LLMs understand language and that their utterances do not have meaning, at least not in the sense that the same words uttered by a human do.
So they concede the lack of grounding.
They do.
Wait, if the models don't understand meaning and everyone agrees on that, how can we still argue they are scientifically important? Isn't the lack of meaning a devastating functional failure?
This is the pivot point. This is where the LLM becomes a tool again rather than a flawed theory. The fact that LLMs are all grammar, no meaning is not a failure of the machine. It's a scientific gift to us. It's a profound dissociation.
A dissociation, what do you mean by that?
I mean, it forces us to distinguish between two competencies that have historically been bundled together in human language studies. Mahalwald and colleagues explored this in their paper, Dissociating Language and Thought in Large Language Models. They argue we have to separate two things.
Okay, the first is formal linguistic competence. So that's the grammar, the syntax, the sheer mechanics of fluency.
Correct. And second is functional linguistic competence, and that's the thought behind the language. The ability to use that language to accomplish goals, which involves reasoning, logic, planning, and real-world common sense.
And the LLMs have extremely high formal competence, but, notoriously weak functional competence. We see this every day when they hallucinate facts or fail a complex logic problem, even when their output is grammatically flawless.
That failure is the scientific discovery. The LLM success isolates the pure statistical ability to manage syntax. Its failure isolates what that ability lacks.
And this dissociation is incredibly powerful because it actually mirrors findings in human cognitive science.
Like in aphasia studies, where patients can sometimes retain syntactic structure, even as their ability to reason or recall meaning is impaired.
So the model is providing a robust computational proof of principle that syntax can exist and probably be acquired separately from other more robust forms of high-level thinking and reasoning. It's telling us precisely what is not required to achieve fluency.
The empty symbol isn't a dead end. It's an incredibly bright, flashing light illuminating the boundaries of syntax itself. It tells us that statistical learning can generate beautiful, complex grammatical structures, but it can never generate true understanding without grounding in a physical, interactive, goal-oriented world.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most damning critique regarding the LLM's claims to model human language. If the formal competence is a function of the input data, and that input data is purely text, how valid is any generalization we draw about human cognition?
This is Cuskley and her team's most powerful argument. They reiterate that the LLM enterprise suffers from the streetlight effect. Because text is easy to scrape and digitize, it's where the light is, we generalize its features to represent all language, and we ignore the vast darkness of what we miss.
And this text-only focus fundamentally limits what LLMs can tell us, because human language is defined by all the elements that text excludes.
Right. Let's break down the three major exclusions caused by relying solely on these massive text corpora.
Okay, first up is the problem of multimodality.
Human language is an orchestration of the senses. It is not just words on a screen. It includes prosody, the stress and rhythm we use to convey emotion or sarcasm intonation, and co-speech gesture.
Right.
And Cuskley's team emphasizes that all these elements are essential for achieving successful, functional linguistic interaction. Try explaining to someone over text exactly how to fold a complex origami shape without any gestures or visual aids. You quickly realize how much work those non-text elements are doing. LLMs miss that entire rich nonverbal symphony.
And secondly, and this is related, is the problem of interaction. Language isn't a broadcast, it's a shared activity.
It is fundamentally a social cooperative act. Human language is co-constructed by people. LLMs are closed entities. They get a prompt, they generate a response, but they can't perform the basic real-time social functions that are critical to human communication.
For instance.
For instance, they can't fluently manage turn-taking in the rapid, subtle way humans do. They can't perform spontaneous repair functions, quickly fixing misunderstandings or ambiguous references mid-conversation, or engage in common ground negotiation where two speakers are continually confirming that they share the same knowledge.
I think the analogy they use is incredibly insightful here. Trying to learn human language by reading a text corpus is like trying to learn how to dance by reading a book.
Oh, that's perfect.
You can learn the rules and the forms, but you miss the rhythm, the flow, and the necessary coordination with a partner.
That is exactly it. And this interactive element begins right at birth. Even pre-linguistic behavior in human infants, like babbling and early joint attention, is multidirectional. Infants actively use their sounds and gestures to regulate and simplify their caregiver's speech. It creates this dynamic feedback loop that drives their development.
And the LLM has no such feedback loop.
None. It's simply trained on the final, static product of human interaction.
But the final critique concerning data diversity and bias is, for me, the most significant scientific concern. The reliance on text imposes severe limitations on any generalization about human language.
This is a major structural problem. We just have to acknowledge that LLMs are built exclusively on data that is written.
And that written focus immediately excludes a massive component of human language.
It does. First, it completely excludes an entire modality of natural human language, sign languages, simply because they don't have a standardized, widely used written form that could be scraped from the internet.
And that cuts off a modality that has been crucial for decades in studying the underlying structure of language independent of speech mechanisms.
Absolutely. And when we look at spoken languages, the filter becomes even more aggressive. How many languages are we actually talking about when we say human language?
I think people will be surprised.
There are approximately 7,000 living human languages. Cuskley's team points out that only a little over half, specifically 4,178, actually use a writing system.
So LLMs, by definition, exclude nearly 4,000 human languages from their training. And they further exclude the spoken, interactive, and gestural forms of the other 3,000 or so.
The problem isn't just exclusion, it's the resulting bias. When researchers claim LLMs prove something definitive about human language, they are only referring to the written form of a tiny fraction of high-resource, mostly English, human language.
And that's a harmful overgeneralization in cognitive science. It risks further amplifying harmful existing biases towards English, assuming that features unique to literate, high-resource languages, like our obsession with strict word order or complex subordinating clauses, are universal features of the human language capacity.
When they might just be artifacts of literacy in specific cultural contexts.
Exactly.
And researchers who recognize the scale and bias problem have tried to fix it. This has led to something called the Baby LM Challenge.
Right. This is an engineering effort to make LLM training more developmentally plausible by reducing the data to a childlike scale, say 10 million words, which is roughly what a child hears in their first couple of years.
This attempts to address the data scale problem, but Cuskley and her colleagues point out what they call a fatal flaw in this Baby LM approach.
And that's the flaw.
It lies in the training methodology. To achieve even marginal competence, these smaller models have to be trained for hundreds of training epochs.
And an epoch means the model passes over the training set many times.
Yes. A human child hears about 10 million words in total, but those are 10 million different words and sentences. The model, on the other hand, reads the same 10 million words hundreds of times over. It's the computational equivalent of giving a child the right 10 million words of content, say child-directed speech transcripts, but making them read the same 500 picture books every single day for 2 years.
So the data input might be qualitatively better, but the learning process is fundamentally unnatural and unrealistic.
Completely.
And despite this unnatural, repetitive, and intensive exposure, what are the results of these baby models? Do they succeed?
They still fail. They consistently fail at basic language tasks that a typically developing 2-year-old masters with ease, particularly tasks involving complex syntax like generating and understanding certain types of interrogative clauses.
So if the model is given the right type of data, but has to repeat it unnaturally hundreds of times and it still fails at toddler-level syntax, doesn't that reinforce the original nativist point? That statistical learning, even with sufficient data, just can't bridge the gap.
It really shifts the focus. It proves that the computational power of the human brain, coupled with the quality of the human input, the interaction, the multimodality, the grounding, the immediate social context, must be doing something absolutely essential that pure statistical learning on text input alone simply cannot achieve.
The failure of the Baby LM challenge is arguably the strongest existence proof that LLMs are not models of human language acquisition.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay, this has been a truly spirited debate.
Mhm.
On one side, you have the phenomenal success of LLMs, which use statistical learning to account for formal grammar. And that directly challenges the 50-year reign of the poverty of stimulus argument.
And on the other, you have compelling evidence that these models fundamentally fail to capture the interactive, embodied, and diverse nature of human language, relying on an unnaturally massive text-only input.
What's particularly encouraging, though, despite the deep theoretical disagreements on mechanism and development, is that both major research camps, the proponents of the existence proof and the strong functional critics, they reach almost the exact same point in their conclusion,
The synthesis of agreement.
which is that LLMs are primarily tools.
Precisely. Cuskley and her colleagues summarize this perfectly. They say LLMs are not theories of language, but tools that may be used to study language. Their success should be viewed as a computational resource, but it must be applied with specific hypotheses to motivate research, not just blindly generalized.
And the proponents, Contreras-Callens and their team, they agree. They conclude that LLMs provide full-fledged computational models for cognitive scientists to empirically evaluate just how far statistical learning might take us in explaining the full complexity of human language.
They are powerful computational levers, and as we noted earlier, it is often where they fail that is the most eliminating. Their shortcomings in interaction, in grounding real-world concepts, and in handling the diversity of human language are not just engineering bugs. They are bright, flashing signs pointing us toward what makes human language truly unique.
We should acknowledge the historical significance of their success, though. Even if we accept all the caveats regarding meaning and development, the LLM's mere existence achieved something enormous. They successfully shifted the burden of proof.
That is a key scientific achievement, absolutely. They showed that statistical learning can do more than the nativist theory ever allowed for. The burden of proof is now on the nativists to show precisely which aspects of grammar are impossible to acquire statistically, given sufficient resources.
And conversely.
Conversely, the burden is on the LLM proponents to move beyond written text and functional output to prove that there are shared developmental and mechanistic principles.
So the final nuanced takeaway is that LLMs are not a model of the human mind, but they are the sharpest computational tool that cognitive science has developed in decades.
They're the Cessna that helps us understand the bird. By isolating the formal syntactic component and showing how far next word prediction can take us, LLMs allow us to study the other, inherently human components of language: the rich interaction, the grounding in the body, the multimodality, the rapid development with new precision.
They define the boundaries of pure statistical competence, allowing us to focus our research efforts on what lies beyond those boundaries.
A valuable tool, not a complete theory of human language.
A tool that demands critical engagement. It reminds us that the incredible functional success in generating text is achieved through fundamentally non-human means and on a non-human scale. It requires us to approach these models with a healthy and, I think, necessary dose of skepticism.
And if we're serious about building models that genuinely mirror human cognitive development, we have to accept the limitations revealed by that data diversity critique. The LLM success shows the staggering power of statistical learning on static text. But their failures, specifically in the Baby LM challenge, show us that the next frontier for cognitive science and AI engineering is to radically redefine data input.
Meaning we need to move beyond just scraping trillions of words of written text from the internet.
Absolutely. The next generation of research has to incorporate the rich, multimodal, interactive, and socially grounded experience that defines language acquisition in every typically developing child. We need data that captures the full symphony of cooperation that we call human language, including gestures, tone, and real-time social dynamics.
And only then can we test if statistical learning, given biologically plausible input, can truly model the human mind.
That's the challenge.
That is a powerful and challenging thought to leave with our listener. The focus needs to shift from the size of the text corpus to the quality and the diversity of the input stream. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly complex and foundational debate.
It was a pleasure to unpack these crucial points.
To our listener, thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.